And we should head live in a second now. I believe we are live. Hello everyone. Welcome to another episode. And I'm here with a gentleman that does not need any introduction. Mr. Craig, how are you doing? How's you there so far?
I'm very good. Yes, a nice quiet day, a bit of a break from testing. It's been quite full on, hasn't it, for these past few weeks? So the first couple of days actually just trying to understand everything that's been going on in Formula One over the past few weeks.
Well, I mean, looking at this, we spoke, you and me, before the Bahrain testing, and we talked after Barcelona testing, which we had no clue of what's going on there. It was a closed testing session. Bahrain, first week, it was a bit cold, but then second, we started to see cars on track.
Yeah.
But overall, just give me your summary just by looking at these cars. We're not talking about the engines because we know this is a regulation for engines. Just looking at these cars, what did you sense by just looking at them going on track compared to the other generation of cars, like the last previous reg and the one before?
Yeah, well, I mean, the first thing I noticed was I thought the cars actually just looked they were very good looking cars. You know, they are relatively uncomplicated. I think their dimensions, they're just a good looking car to look at. That was the first thing. But once you actually start to see the TV footage and seeing the cars on the track, the thing that I'm probably most surprised at is just how difficult these cars are to drive, how edgy they are. You know, we've seen so many huge lockups. We've seen drivers drifting out of corners. For the first time for many years, and I've been watching Formula One since the 1970s, is we've actually got cars that are quite a handful for the driver to cope with. Lots and lots of torque, very little grip, and they're edgy in a way to drive the last generation of cars weren't. The last generation of cars were quite unpleasant to drive, but they had lots and lots of downforce for the power that they had. So I think this is actually going to be quite an entertaining generation of cars to watch the drivers struggle with. And I think that's a good thing. I think everyone's just got too used to F1 cars looking like they're on rails.
Really? You would say they're cars on rails? I mean,
the previous generations, you look on board and the driver's hands, they're not fighting and the car's always got its wheels in line. Now you're seeing drivers, having to take 3 attempts to get around a corner and to get the power down. They're difficult to drive. And I think some people may find that that's a bad thing. I think it's a good thing.
Okay, no. I take it back because I thought you meant this generation of cars.
Oh, no.
They look like they're on rails, because I was like, hold on a minute now, because I was like, these cars look a bit feisty to get right. But yeah, so I mean, a lot of people are not the most optimistic about this generation, and we're gonna get slowly into it. Let's go through some of the drivers' comments. Let's go with the from this grid, with all the respect to all other drivers that we have, like based on their statistics and their numbers, they're the best we have. Alonso, Lewis, and Max, all three did not have I would say the most complimentary and positive comments about this regulation, specifically Max. Alonso, for obvious reasons, because of the situation with Honda. We're gonna get into it later, but give me your thoughts. What do you think about their comments regarding this generation?
I think it's very early days for the drivers to feel, but these are very different cars to drive. There's lots of different skills that the driver needs to bring in, lots of different practices they need to bring into their driving, which are very different. Really, as much as we've had KERS and hybrid systems, the drivers really have just had a strap mode dial on the steering wheel to cope with, and a couple of extra buttons. Now you're talking about the drivers having to think constantly about how they use the power that they've got available, or the energy that they've got available. Are they able to recover it? And if they're going to try and overtake someone, have they got the battery to allow them to complete that maneuver? And it is very different. And some drivers won't like it. I mean, Alonso and Lewis have been in Formula One for quite a long time. Max, maybe less so, excuse me. But Max has always been very outspoken, and he's very simple in what Max wants. He just wants to go out and race. You know, we see that with his gaming, with go-karting, with his interest now in the World Endurance Championship and doing Le Mans. He just wants to race, and I don't think he wants to be weighed down by all of the complicated systems that are now on the car. So in one respect, I can understand these drivers not liking these cars, but it is very early days, and we'll talk about this probably constantly throughout our chat today, is what each of the teams and each of the engine manufacturers were actually giving their drivers in terms of the maximum available is really debatable. Ferrari had a very strong test. Red Bull looked like they started very well, but then dialed their engine back. And I've got no doubt that Mercedes were not giving all of their drivers across the 4 teams that they supply with the full power unit, the full energy recovery, the full energy deployment. So I think it was going to take a few races for us to understand, and perhaps for the drivers to be able to grasp exactly what's involved in driving these cars. And some will like it and some won't. But Formula One has changed constantly throughout its life. It's always changing, and this is just another change that the drivers will either have to cope with or complain about.
I mean, I've got somebody here asking hard.4x asking a question. I think Mr. Craig just cut out for a second. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Can you hear me? Oh, okay. Yeah. So somebody here in the comments asked the question, hard.4x, simple question. So the championship might be now between Ferrari and Mercedes, at least until August. What do you think about that?
I think that's very simplistic. I think the Ferrari power unit is showing to be very good. It's been very reliable. They've put a huge amount of mileage on just a single power unit. Whereas Mercedes, well, we don't really know where they are, as I was sort of saying a second ago. I don't think we've seen the full performance from Mercedes, although we have seen them break down a number of times with various issues, which is a worry. We know that there's another specification of engine or power unit coming for the Melbourne Grand Prix. And they've got this potential advantage if this vote goes through, running up to the mid-season summer break. So, I think there is definitely a battle there, but I don't think you can discount the Red Bull powertrains, Ford power unit in the Red Bull as well. That had an incredibly good test. The first week in Bahrain, they were going so well that I think everyone now believes that Red Bull have turned that power unit down just so that they don't stand out too much. But in terms of the energy strategy that Red Bull were able to employ and the general reliability, very strong. I think all we can really say is that it's going to be a fight between what was the top 4 teams last year carrying into this year. I can't see any of the midfield teams taking a step upwards. And we know that Honda are in trouble. So, yes.
Oh, speaking of Honda. Well, it's going to be a bit of a hasty topic right here about this because, well, I mean, I have a friend, Hadi Al-Kathiri, shout out to him, a beIN Sport representative, TV representative and commentator. We were chatting earlier, and we were running some questions. I wanted him to be here with us, but for him, fortunately, he was caught up with some stuff, so he couldn't be. But he's sending his regards, and he has some questions that we put together, so it's gonna be useful for us. And and as well, not just for us and for all the listeners and the viewers to get an understanding about what we could possibly be watching and yeah, be expecting from the season. Before we get into that, I have somebody here, Idris, asking, hi, can you ask how Aston or Newey can figure out their issues regarding Honda? We're going to keep Honda the last thing, so stick with us to the end, because Honda is a whole subject by itself, and Aston Martin by itself. Let's see. Last question here. We have Red Bull ironically completed 2026 laps with their new power unit according to GP, and they are very happy from the data they collected. But on the track, they might need some time to catch up. What do you think on that?
I mean, that's a fair assessment. I mean, I think the power unit certainly exceeded my expectations for its first series of tests. You have to remember that as much as Red Bull powertrains have been running a power unit in Formula One for the past few years, it was very much the Honda power unit. They didn't design it, they were really managing it. So this is their first full complete power unit with some assistance from Ford, which, you know, let's face it, when you think of a tight, agile Formula One team, or the power unit manufacturing side of the team, and then you think of the huge involvement of Ford, it takes you back to the Ford versus Ferrari Le Mans film that's been out recently, and it's, you know, tearing your hair out that Ford are trying to run things as the huge conglomerate that they are, rather than an agile Formula One team. So I think they're actually way ahead of where I would have expected them to be. And, you know, we have to accept that maybe that isn't the perfect power unit compared with the Mercedes and the Ferrari, which have obviously got a lot more experience, a lot more maturity in the sport. So, yeah, and, you know, Red Bull themselves are going through a big change. You know, it's still their first year post Adrian Newey. And, you know, we saw them improve through last year. We've seen them take some very sensible decisions about how they chose to develop this year's car. So, yeah, maybe Red Bull will need a bit of time. But as I've said to everyone I've spoken to through this pre-season, this is a very long season again. You know, I mean, we're starting in a couple of weeks, and, you know, it's going to be the end of the year before this season's over. And, you know, it's going to be changing several times who has the advantage, either constantly or at certain circuits. So I think Red Bull will probably have some difficulties over these first few races, because that's just how these things happen. But I think they'll mature and develop very quickly, and they'll be as competitive as Red Bull have been for the past handful of years. So both the power unit and the chassis may be slightly unprepared, but looking good already.
I have another question for Red Bull, but we're going to go first and talk about the whole controversy about the Mercedes power unit and their 1.18 ratio. Walk me through that step by step. So basically, I mean, well, I don't want to get too deep into it. I'll leave that to you because you're the expert here.
Yeah.
Could that be, my only question is, could that be one of the reasons of the little snags of reliability, could be the cause of one of the little, you know, issues they've been facing with the reliability with the engines? And could it be also a reason of to why Red Bull, like, you know what, let's just drop this, let's not do it, but in the process, let's just snitch on Mercedes?
It's very complicated, because this started very early this year with very little evidence or facts backing up anything that anyone was saying. When this story first came out, I kind of didn't believe it. There just didn't seem to be enough facts backing everything up. But it does appear that Mercedes have found something in their power unit. And just to summarize, so people might understand, is last year there was a compression ratio limit, which was done basically just by simply measuring the CAD models of the power unit. And that was 18:1. They've tried to detune the combustion engine for this year. They've reduced, amongst other things, the compression ratio down to 16:1, which means that inside the cylinder inside the engine is how much does that eventually compress that area down in as a form of a ratio, which gives you 16:1. Now, your road car probably has less than 10:1, unless you've got something quite high performance. Even normal racing car engines don't go quite as high as 16:1, but a turbocharged engine would typically have a lower compression ratio. But these very odd Formula One engines, with their incredibly lean burning technology, they use so little fuel now, use really high compression ratios. The teams don't want to give that compression ratio up. So what Mercedes have done is created a little chamber inside the cylinder head that, when you do the measurements, gives you a 16:1 compression ratio when it's cold. When everything warms up, and we think they've got a very special piston that grows slightly in height as it gets warm up to operating temperature, which in a Formula One engine is about 130 degrees. So that is, significantly higher than ambient temperature, particularly here in Europe at the moment, because it's very cold. And when the engine gets hot, this chamber in the cylinder head gets closed off somehow, and we don't know how this is done. This is all conjecture. And that means you then get an increased compression ratio, which gives you more power. And, the other teams found out about this through Red Bull and some of their engineers, and quite rightly said, well, you're just simply cheating. I mean, we've seen similar people or teams do things with the power unit over the past handful of years, and it was proven to be, unfair. I wouldn't use the word illegal, because it never actually happened for a few of these situations. And now there seems to be this situation where all the teams get a vote on whether Mercedes are allowed to continue to run with this power unit, which seems strange, because there's only 4 teams with Mercedes power units, therefore there's 7 teams without them. I don't know how this vote's going to go. I think it probably will allow the engine to continue running all the way up to the summer break, and then they're going to have to change the engine. But even then, I'm not sure if that is necessarily fair. Mercedes get half a season of an advantage, and then they're able to redevelop their engine to be legal under the change in regulations. No one else is getting the chance to re-engineer their engine mid-season. So, it's all a bit unsatisfactory. It's all very political. And I think what we've seen through testing so far in terms of relative competitiveness of the Mercedes power unit and their teams is, they're sandbagging mainly for political reasons as much as competitive reasons. This is a big mess, and I think it really does need to get sorted out once and for all before we reach Melbourne, because it will get very nasty very quickly once everyone is crammed into that tiny paddock in Melbourne at Albert Park. And I think it is very bad for the image of Formula One. So hopefully there'll be some kind of compromise agreed here.
You mentioned sandbagging, and let me give you the leaning forward of seriousness to ask this question. What's the point of teams sandbagging even in the final day of testing? Like, reason you test everything, obviously you start gradually slow, and then you just build up through every day, every session, every minute of testing. So what's the point of some teams to even like sandbag, in testing?
Yeah.
And this is just a general question for even somebody who's new, because by the look of things, it looks like Ferrari is about to win it all. But we know that cannot be true coming into Melbourne. So just give me your reasons of to why teams would do that.
Okay, so you have to think in compared to the old days where testing was the only way you could actually find out how everything would work on your car. Nowadays, you've got all of these simulations that go back on in the factory. These are not just the driver simulators, but also lap time simulators, lots of CFD and structural analysis of these cars. The teams pretty much know exactly how these cars are going to operate on the track before they've even built the car and got it out on testing. So testing isn't about actually proving your car can go as fast as it possibly can. or for as long as it possibly can, because you kind of know how that is already. So what testing is about now is actually just proving these simulations. Now, I can remember many, many years ago, Williams in their heyday in the very early 80s were testing in Brazil, as every team did back in those days, and they would get the drivers just to lift off on the straights because they didn't need to get the full lap time in. If they knew that the car was only going, you know, at maybe 12,000 RPM on the straight rather than 13, then they could kind of factor that in. And that's what they're doing today. All they're doing is doing these laps to understand what the tires are doing, the suspension, the aerodynamics, the power unit, the transmission, everything else. And you don't have to go out and try and set the maximum lap time. So that's what people will call sandbagging. Now, when the teams add this all up, they get the confirmation that they need that their simulations are being matched by reality without ever having to do that maximum lap. And that just keeps, it keeps all their secrets to themselves. And they know that when they finally put everything together in qualifying in a couple of weeks in Melbourne, and then obviously the races and all the Grand Prix subsequently, that's, you can't sandbag then. I mean, even now you see, maybe on a Friday, teams not showing their full hand in free practice. But when it comes to qualifying, suddenly, one team will find half a second and the teams that were looking good, are nowhere at all. So this is just the way modern Formula One works. And I don't think it's sandbagging in any way that trying to trick anybody else, because all the teams know what everyone else is doing. They can look at the data very closely in ways that I simply don't understand. So it really is just it's just a way of kind of not putting everything together and giving away secrets to their rivals quite as much as they perhaps did in the old days.
Well, I mean that pretty much you just put it there perfectly. And you mentioned, like, you see teams in free practice looking like the best, and then the team that we always know that have the best car just wakes up and decide to ruin the hopes and dreams of fans who are wishing to see something different. Our friend here, Abdullah, saying, Aston Martin's problems are caused by my karma. A lot to explain, but take it like this now. Well, we'll take your answers later, because you put in a bold statement here. Well, I know Abdullah and his some of his connections that he has inside the Aston. We will leave it there. We're not going to discuss it any further until we find out more details later. So we spoke about Red Bull, and I wanted to bring the topic back to that.
Mm-hmm.
Red Bull, so far, we know that Red Bull is building the power unit, and Ford is there to, supply the battery and all. How much of a surprise was it for you to see Red Bull that took the DNA of Honda engine and built with that, doing far better than the team that built that actual engine? I mean, Honda did not build the 2026 engine for Red Bull, but I mean, the maps are almost similar just by removing, I think, the MGH. Correct me if I'm wrong. Was it MGH or MGK?
That's right.
Yeah. So by just removing one simple factor, we're not going to get into the details, but the engine is the same. We have bigger batteries. How come our Red Bull, and fair play to Red Bull and their team of engineers who have done fantastic to run these sessions and all these testings without any issues?
Yeah, so it's interesting. When you forget about Formula One for a moment and think about these as engineering businesses, Red Bull decided to set up their own powertrain program here in the UK. In the process of doing that, they've taken people from Honda. They've had some of the design data from Honda as well, allowed them to continue to manage that power unit all the way up to 2025. And they have picked and chosen engineers from, other Formula One power unit manufacturers, Ben Hodgkinson from Mercedes, who's heading the operation. And it's a little bit like, almost like Mercedes were when they first came into the sport after Brawn, and they were picking engineers from all, the best engineers from all these other teams, bringing them together with some very strong management and with plenty of budget, and getting the job done right. And that's exactly what Red Bull powertrains have done. They've not had a complete standing start like you would perhaps see the Audi power unit has, where they've got absolutely no background in it at all. They've had to start that completely from scratch. So they've done a fantastic job. It's still more difficult for them than it has been for Ferrari and Mercedes. And I was almost going to add Honda, which was obviously the other incumbent power unit supplier. But they've done this in a very diligent engineering-led fashion. And I think that's worked well. And they're very close. They're literally based in the same areas as the team. And when you have the chassis and the power unit and the aero people all working together, as Ferrari have done for many years, that's when you get some real results. And that's just worked beautifully for Red Bull. Honda, I'm sure we'll come to it, is a totally different question. And there's different issues, I think, underlying Honda's problems.
I mean, speaking, you mentioned Audi. Thoughts on Audi so far? I mean, they are under the radar, I would say. But
yeah,
compared to Honda, as we said, Honda, we're leaving them last because they're going to be the dessert of the night. Compared to Honda, where do you see them stack up with their engine? I'm putting Cadillac aside because, yeah, it's a new team, but they are not building their own power units. So, Audi,
I mean, it's been fascinating, hasn't it? I mean, I constantly have to remind myself that we talk about Audi, but we have to remember that is the Sauber team that have been in Formula One since, what was that, the late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah.
So it's not a completely new team, but it is the first time that, they've created a Formula One power unit, which is the really big challenge. When you look at the aero update Audi added to the car at the start of the Bahrain test, you just felt that this was definitely something that had been worked out between the Audi and the Sauber engineers. It's got so many shapes in it that there's just some DNA of both the teams there. But the power unit, I mean, it seems just to be working very reliably. Doesn't seem to have any obvious faults. It's, it would be the perfect start, you must say, for what they would have ever expected in, just their first few days of testing. And it bodes very well. And having watched Audi in Formula E, in the World Endurance Championship, in DTM, you just know that the people working over in Germany, again, it's just a very well-run engineering operation. And although the scale of the task, I would say Formula One is far bigger than anything they've tackled in the past, they seem to be getting the job done as well as you could ever expect. I know a lot of people are ranking Audi well above people like Cadillac, Williams, and Aston Martin as, where do they stand in the rankings? I think we may see a slight change to the reality of that when we get to Melbourne and, everything really kicks off. But yeah, I mean, it's just been, fantastic to see them enter the sport. And I guess, again, knowing Audi's history in motorsport, quite ominous. Just as Mercedes came in and showed us that, German engineering, Audi are going to do that. And I could see Audi within, a few years being one of the top teams and certainly one of the top power unit manufacturers.
Since we're talking about PUs, I need your thoughts on the whole engine to battery ratio in this current regulation. And what is harder for the teams now? Is it managing the electrical batteries or the combustion engine?
I think the difficulty is very much on the hybrid side. The combustion engine, it's effectively a detuned version of what they had last year. And while, let's not underestimate the challenge that gives them, that they're now trying to race a power unit with, or a combustion engine well over 500 horsepower with basically half of the petrol they had just a handful of years ago. You know, this really is cutting edge in combustion technology, but that is in some respects a bit more natural to the engineering teams. The hybrid system and how that then works with how the team operate the car at the track around the lap, and the drivers, being able to recover energy and deploy energy when they want to. This is massively complicated. I wouldn't love to know the millions, if not billions, of simulations of different scenarios they must have run in order to get to where they are today. And it's a problem because the power unit regulations really did end up being quite a big compromise. And initially we knew there was going to be a much more equal balance of electrical to combustion, but in the process they threw away the potential to use some other energy recovery systems. One of them, which is the MGUH, which was attached to the turbocharger. Now that was, as we understand, discarded because of its cost, its complication, but there are other solutions. We saw Porsche using something much simpler on their World Endurance LMP1H car. And we also had the option to have a motor generator unit recover energy from the front axle, so effectively acting as the front brakes rather than the front disc brakes, which would have given the drivers as much energy as they could ever deploy around a lap. But again, there was lots of politics, there was lots of committees that decided that wouldn't be in some of the existing manufacturers' interests. So what we've ended up with is that same near 50-50. It's actually more like 47% maximum for the hybrid, because that is capped. The more power they can get out of the combustion engine, the more that will power will go up. So it's very difficult. And speaking to all of the engineers around the sport that I know and saying, what is the most important things for getting a car right this year, and it's going back to energy management and tires. After that, maximum horsepower, aerodynamics, race strategy are very much in the background. It's all about managing the tires and managing your energy. So as we've seen, drivers are running out of battery where they would hope they wouldn't, and they're having to go around corners in ways that are unusual to them because they need to recover more energy. Bahrain is quite a point and squirt circuit. So when we get to some of these faster tracks, and I think Jeddah will probably be one of the first ones, we're going to see the drivers really having to manage this energy recovery in a way that we've never seen. How the commentators are going to deal with this, how the on-screen graphics, and how us fans are going to understand this is quite difficult to know at this stage. I think
I have one more track before Jeddah. That's going to give us, sorry to interrupt you. That track is going to be China, because there's 2 long straights, and that's
yes,
I agree with you, Jed. I think if I ask you which tracks do you believe these cars are just going to look, I would say, horrendous when it comes in terms of their performance, and as well how hard that's going to be, because again, like my friend that I told you, was we're trying to put some of these questions together. He told me, like, even for us commentators, Hadi with being Sport, he said even for us commentator and analysts, we just gonna be bamboozled by not knowing what's going on, and as well explaining what's going on. Which tracks do you think these cars are just not gonna look good?
Well, there's 2 or 3 factors on a track that will make it good or bad. Obviously, long straights would be one of them, as you say, China. But then you also have not just so much long straights, but when you have a very long sector where you have, and Baku is one of the obvious ones. Baku, you come out of into the final sector, and even before you hit the start-finish straight, you've been flat out for 3 or 4 seconds as you go up through the gears, and then you pretty much hit the main straight, and you are flat out on the throttle from that last sector through to the braking zone for about 15, 16 seconds, which means that you only really get 12 point something seconds deployment out of the battery if your battery is full. So Baku will be a big issue because you've got such a long flat out section. And then the other problem will be circuits where there's very little braking. And I mean, one of them traditionally has been somewhere like Silverstone, where it's a very fast, it doesn't have particularly long straights, but it doesn't have many corners where you're going to brake very hard. So it's going to be very hard to put energy into the battery. And if you don't brake, then you have the other problem, which will be that you can actually recover energy from the engine directly when you're at part throttle. So if you think about it, say a driver's going halfway through a corner and you only want about half throttle to give you that balance that you want while you're mid-corner. Well, what you could actually have is the engine could deliver you 80% power rather than 50%, but the hybrid system will suck that 30% out and put it into the battery. Now that's great. It means you can charge your battery when you're not braking, but you're burning petrol in the process of doing that. And at circuits that have got a high fuel consumption, again, Silverstone, obviously Monza, are particularly high, then you won't be able to do that as much as you want. So there's going to be a big pattern. And as I said, the teams will be running millions, if not billions of simulations to try and find the best way of creating energy into that battery to give you the most on the, you know, the flat out sections. I don't know how we're going to understand that. And I think there will be times that we think a driver has made a fantastic move on someone else, or someone has just let someone go flying past them. And we just won't know why. It's a little bit like it used to be with refueling. You never knew quite how much petrol they'd put in the tank. You know, was that pit stop quick because they only put a little bit of fuel in, or because they were just, you know, fantastic at the pit stop? So there'll be lots of unknowns. And again, I think some people will like that random jeopardy that it puts into the sport, and some people will hate that it's not just pure racing. I think, you know, the one thing that I've learned about Formula One in the what you might describe as the post-Drive to Survive era is that there's lots of different fans now, and all of them want something different. We're never going to develop a Formula One category that keeps every fan happy, because you've got the old timers, you've got the young people, the technical people, you know, everyone has a different view of what Formula One needs to be. And, you know, we all just keep watching it regardless. Does it really matter?
I mean, exactly. This is the thing about the sport. You cannot make everyone happy and satisfied. And I've seen someone today, even like, honestly, I'm sorry if I forgot your Twitter handle or your account, but she's very known, Tifosi Sarah. She said something today, was like, people who are being so ambitious and so, like, you know, full of hope just because of testing should understand how testing is, and it's not always translate to the reality of what we're going to see when the season starts. However, the people who wants to, like, you know, put down others who are just happy seeing their team doing well, it's a little bit miserable. So I think that for me, when I read it, I was like, okay, you know what? This actually makes sense. Yeah, if people want to be happy with something, let them be happy. And not everything is going to make you happy. I mean, this is better than whatever street circuit they're bringing into MotoGP. I don't want to even talk about that. Because,
I'm not happy about that at all. Absolutely.
And no one will be happy about that. That is I don't know. I'm trying to put the image in my head, but well, anyway, we go now to Ferrari. They've had, I would say, one of their best testing we've seen in a while. However, we've seen Ferrari last year in testing, and they topped the times, I think, in Bahrain as well with Lewis, I believe, and everyone's like, oh yeah, this is the year of Ferrari, because everyone was trying to translate how Ferrari ended the 2024 season into how they're starting the 2025. Things did not go the way we thought it would go, and but there's one thing we could talk about, that Ferrari launch of the line, and not just Ferrari alone. Every Ferrari power unit or every car powered by Ferrari, they just have a great launch of the line. Do you think this has something to do of how smaller their turbo is, or does that have an effect on their release, and is that something that other teams will try maybe to mitigate by putting some rules that's gonna, not make any all the cars just rev for the longest they need to, get that power to launch?
Yeah. So, I mean, two answers. First of all, on the testing question, Ferrari are looking good. And they're looking good from the performance in testing. Personally, I think the car looks quite technically interesting. Really excited about that. But Ferrari have so often done so well in testing, and given the Tifosi fans, and I think just general motorsport fans, the excitement that maybe this is Ferrari's year, because I think there is still an element of the fan base that want some of these old names to do well. I'm sure there's people that want Williams to come back and do really well, and Aston Martin, every other team. But, Ferrari, I think, maybe go harder in testing than other teams, going back to what we were saying earlier, that some teams don't go for that ultimate pace. They just, test little bits and pieces and poke around the edges of the car's performance envelope. Ferrari very much go all in for lap times. And, often that is, not borne out when we get to the first races. But certainly the Ferrari car that we've seen this year is super interesting. They seem to have approached this car in a way that we haven't seen Ferrari doing for quite a few years. If we think back to the last regulation change, they came out with those beautiful side pods that made no aerodynamic sense whatsoever. And, going back previously, they've had a few sort of radical ideas that have helped them. But this is the first time I think we truly see a radical Ferrari, which actually makes sense. So it makes sense aerodynamically, and we've got all these strange things going on at the back of the car. But I think at the heart of this is very much the power unit that you mentioned. And Ferrari have taken a very balanced approach to how they develop this power unit, knowing that you have to have a race start, but also knowing that you have to stop at the pits at least once or twice every race, and you can't spend 10 seconds in the pit stop waiting for your turbo to spin up. So Ferrari have found a way to get response from the engine that it appears that the other power unit manufacturers have either not realized or chosen not to focus on. These power unit regulations have been out for several years now. So the manufacturers have had plenty of time to think about all of the factors that go in to make it. And yeah, it certainly seems from what we've seen that Ferrari have a slightly smaller turbo, which, just as with road cars and rally cars, if you have a smaller turbo, you may have less peak power, but you've got more drivability, less turbo lag. We haven't got the MGU-H to recover that, and you haven't got the amount of fuel available that you would have in perhaps a WRC car, where you can have all of this pop, pop, bang, bang, anti-lag, keeping the turbo spinning. So I think Ferrari certainly have. In terms of the performance of their starts, well, I am just a little bit concerned that, the other power unit manufacturers are being a little bit political and a little bit careful with what they're showing everyone. And we simply won't know until we get to the race start in Melbourne. So yeah, let's kind of not go too fast on the Ferrari hype train that these starts are as good as we expect. But it certainly does look like it's one of their stronger suits around Bahrain. Is that going to help them when they come to the long straights of China and at Jeddah? Maybe their turbo is too small, and the other teams will get the advantage, and maybe the other teams are able to get off the line better than they've sort of shown us so far. I think there is a little bit of poker going on between the manufacturers, but certainly Ferrari in amongst that top four this year. I think the power unit, the chassis, I think the question will be just the car's overall pace, its tyre management, and the team strategy calls, which have really let them down over the past few years. So I think Ferrari have still got a lot more maturing to do before they really are a championship contending team, but they're certainly in the fight this year.
All right. And believe you're saying we should hold our horses when it comes to the Ferrari hype train, but I'm here to tell you, unfortunately, that train has already set sail. and
It
it's
does.
running
It
fast.
leaves the station every year, but it doesn't always get to its destination.
I mean, let me tell you, that Ferrari hard print right now is a bullet train because that's how
Yeah.
fast everyone is running with it, including me. I'll be honest with you.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm also keeping like cautious with that. You never know, as you mentioned, we could come to Melbourne and tracks with long straights like China, Baku, Jeddah, and then everyone's gonna show you what they have, and conversation could be different. But
Yeah.
still, Ferrari looks strong by what we're looking at. So this is the one of the complicated. I don't know. Do we believe if I added this just for to not make the regulation look bad or not? But the ADUO, if a team has like less than 4%, I believe in their under their PU, then they can add improvements to the engines. Just walk me through these mental gymnastics for me, at least, if you could help me and the viewers.
So you need to remember that for quite a long time now, Formula One power units are homologated. And what that means is the manufacturers will provide the FIA with all of the drawings on CAD of the power unit. And they have to run exactly those parts in every power unit that they have on the grid for whatever period the homologation lasts, which has been recently for quite a few years. Now, the problem with that, as we saw with Renault in recent years, if once everyone starts a new homologation period, if your engine is down on power, you have very little means to actually try and improve it, which is fair in some respects, because at the end of the day, they know that's the regulations. But of course, people come up with different ideas, different solutions. They've got different levels of investment and design. And sometimes, there'll be a manufacturer that's behind on power. Again, kind of Renault is the perfect example of that. So what they've put now in is a mechanism in the rules that will allow a power unit manufacturer that's down on power to make limited changes to get it back into the performance window of its rivals, which I think we all will agree is relatively fair, as long as it doesn't go too far the other way. So you go from having the worst power unit to suddenly having something that dominates everyone else's. But I don't think the regulations will allow this. So the question is, obviously, if you talk to anyone in Formula One, if you go into the paddock and you chat to fans or media or even teams, everyone seems to know the horsepower difference between all these power units. Now, the fact of the matter is, us people outside of the paddock don't know that. People will tell you this all over the internet that, so-and-so is 4 horsepower down. That's complete rubbish. No one knows. The people that do know are the FIA. And they know that because on the shaft that links the engine to the gearbox, there is a torque sensor. So the FIA know exactly how much torque each of these engines has up and down the grid between the different manufacturers. They have the facts, and they will see if there is this, difference between one manufacturer and another. And they can see how that manifests itself, and they will therefore allow one of those manufacturers to make changes. I don't know the detail. And the way that it used to work is if you made a change to your power unit for other reasons like reliability or safety or cost, then you would actually have to give all the other manufacturers the details of what you've changed. Kind of like an open book way of managing the regulations, so that someone can't kind of sneak through a change that isn't related to the problem they've been having. So I think that's exactly how this will work. I think it will work relatively smoothly. I think, whenever this will happen, I think there will be people that won't be happy about it, whether they are other manufacturers or just journalists and fans thinking that it's unfair. But I think this is the best way to tackle what has been, and as we've spoken about power units almost constantly in this chat so far, these are complicated power units. Teams and manufacturers won't be getting it right every time. So yeah, let's put a process in that allows it to be fair for everyone.
I mean, I agree, but I think teams will not agree with that statement because everyone wants to keep their advantage. And now we move to... Oh, so go ahead.
No, I agree with you. Yeah, teams will never be happy that they're giving something away. I mean, but that's just the nature of the sport, isn't it?
I agree. And now we move to what I would love to call the main event. And I'm gonna share the screen right now with you, and I want to show this picture. I don't know. Do you see my screen?
Yeah. Yes, I did see. I saw the video footage of it.
Yeah, we saw the video. I don't want to share the video because we don't want to be hit by copyright. But here's the one thing I want to say. I know you are a veteran and you've been on the stage of Formula One longer than me, and you've known Adrian Newey yourself. I've seen Adrian Newey on screen and once in my lifetime in front of me. But in my entirety of watching Formula One, and every time the camera is on this genius, and even when I saw him in the paddock, and I'm sure even when you saw him, I have never seen him like this.
Well, to be honest, I mean, I don't think you'll see many team principals or even technical directors with a face like that. I mean, it looks like he's got the weight of the world on his shoulders. And Adrian, you know, you got to think about team principals. You know, Christian Horner, Toto Wolff, they are the ultimate politicians in the sport. You know, they've got poker faces. You know, you never know what they're thinking, whether what they're saying is true or just, you know, a political position. Adrian, I think, is a much simpler person in that respect, and you know, body language speaks lots. And I mean, I think that what you see in that picture is exactly the situation at Aston Martin Honda right now. And I can't remember a team in such dire straits before a season, where you're actually going and actually calculating what the 107% lap time is for qualifying. You know, we've seen, okay, I mean, funny enough, it's been McLaren a couple of times when McLaren joined with Honda that first time with Alonso, just you know, what, 2015, you know, just 11 years ago. And then they had problems with their exhaust blown diffuser a few years before that. And they were looking in a terrible situation at the start of the season. They actually recovered, and I seem to remember they won races as well. For Aston Martin, you just think, you know, are they going to qualify? Are they going to reach the end of the season intact? It is unusual.
I mean, just looking at this car itself here, I mean, I'm no aerodynamicist, but just looking at it, he knows that Adrian put the work, and the rest of the team with him put the work into this car. What do you think what went wrong exactly that just set them back to where they are right now when it comes to because we see Honda now releasing statements, and we haven't seen probably the Aston Martin statement. Aston Martin want to sell their shares to Lawrence Stroll, and I can say this here. I'm okay to say this here. Aramco is not happy. And so everyone was walking into 2026 believing it's a new regulation. Honda knows the V6 hybrid engines and everything. They've done well with it. They've won a couple of championships now with it, and now we have this. What do you think? It completely went wrong.
So I mean, I think we all have to agree that fundamentally the problem is with the Honda power unit. That's not to exonerate Aston Martin from blame. We know their gearbox has issues, probably made worse by the way you've got to run the Honda engine and these new engines. The chassis looks fantastic. I mean, I've been joking with everyone calling it the Green Bull because it looks very much like Adrian's taken the best ideas in his head from Red Bull and then going and planted them and developed them at Aston Martin. So the chassis looks fantastic. I think the problem is in the relationship between Aston Martin and Honda. Now, I've said this a few times to people over the pre-season. You need to learn from the past. And this is what surprises me most about Aston Martin, because Adrian Newey has worked with Honda for the past few years and has seen how it's worked in the past. Honda are a very unusual partner. Now, if you think back to when they first came into Formula One in the 60s, it was with their own team. Then they came back as an engine manufacturer in the 80s with a turbo engine, and they kind of gave it to a little F2 team to run, and then they kind of dropped them and then gave it to Williams. Now, Williams thought, well, this is fantastic. You know, we've got this great engine. And when that engine arrived at Williams for the first tests of that year, which was 84, I think it was, if I can remember now, the engine was a completely different design to what they'd been given the drawings for. The engine was like really high up at the top with the inlet plenums, and they had to cut the bodywork and rapidly mold a cover to go over it. And then you think, well, I mean, there was a fantastic documentary series about McLaren and Honda when they started racing in 2015. And again, the Honda engine turned up, and the size of the bolts that bolt the engine to the chassis were different to the ones in the drawings they've been given. Honda are a fantastic power unit manufacturer. You know, their history proves it going all the way back, but they need to be managed. They have a way of doing things which is very internal. And in Formula One, you can't work with a partner like that. You need to be completely open and have lots of dialogue and lots of people managing and passing any changes to everyone that needs to know about it. And I think this is where Honda and Aston Martin have fallen down again, and it's history sadly repeating itself. We know that Andy Cowell was the team principal, and now Adrian Newey is. And we thought he'd been sacked. It was actually probably, I mean, I don't want to start apportioning blame, but he has now gone over to Japan, to Sakura, to Honda R&D to try and sort these problems out. But these problems should have been sorted out by someone just like that 2 years ago. You know, it can't come into the weeks before the first test and you're finding major problems with the power unit. Now, I don't know what these problems are in any detail, but you get the feeling that this could have been managed so much better. Just as Red Bull have had to do with Ford, with their power unit. I know there were problems with that, 2 years ago, but they've got a handle on it really quickly. You know, everyone's working together, and you just don't get that feeling between Aston Martin and Honda. And yeah, I think that there's lots of people that aren't happy. The sponsors. I mean, you look at pictures of Lance Stroll. I was going through all of the photo dumps I've been given, and I can't find a picture of Lance smiling in any of them. And he looks as sad and down as Adrian Newey does in that photo. So yeah, I think this is a terrible case of mismanagement of the engineering teams working together. That could have been predicted, that could have been prevented, and now leaves them in the really difficult situation that these first races, they might not even qualify. If they finish the race, it would be a miracle, because they've not achieved that during testing. Now, I don't doubt that given time, and of course, you've got to remember that you're restricted in budget this year, that you're restricted in aero testing, that the engine manufacturers are limited in their budget and dyno testing time as well now for the first time. So how can they recover this? If they can get that, the engine reliability is just one issue that they can fix, and the underlying engine has the energy recovery and the combustion engine output that puts them in a league with everyone else, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw an Aston Martin victory this year. The foundations are there. But to get there, there's a lot of work to be done and a lot of embarrassment to be suffered. So it's going to be lots of very hard times for everyone involved in all of the companies involved in this.
To be fair, I mean, going with what we're seeing currently and what you mentioned, they might struggle even qualifying, let alone finish a race.
Yeah.
If I don't see what miracle it is, even during this month of Ramadan, that they could work a win this season. This is just my assessment personally. And again, but you mentioned something very important. Aston Martin had the same snag that McLaren hit with Honda.
Yeah.
You're building your chassis in a way, and then Honda doing their own thing, building the engine on a different map than whatever you're trying to map around their engine. So it's like you're trying to build this Lego set, and you're like,
Oh,
okay, I'm gonna keep this much space, and then somebody comes and bring you, I don't know, a brick, and be like, yeah, put it there. No,
yeah,
I want a Lego set to finish this, not a brick.
yeah.
How did Red Bull manage this with Honda? Starting
So
specifically in 2021, which is a season everyone thought, okay, last season of a regulation, Mercedes probably going to clean sweep this again, and we move on to new regs. And we moved into a new regulation, and Honda was working like butter. What changed? And
so
specifically,
again,
sorry to interrupt you,
no, no.
specifically since this been with Adrian Newey as well.
Again, this is the baffling thing. I know Adrian was on gardening leave for a period last year, but surely, a couple of phone conversations must have happened. How Red Bull managed this is that Red Bull, there's two factors really for Red Bull. First of all, they really struggled with Renault as an engine partner. If you can remember, that Renault power unit was really low down on power during the V8 era, and then they had all of those issues with the dual hybrid turbo that came in 2014. I mean, I can remember, I mean, I'm nobody in the paddock, but Christian Horner would come and find anyone with a press pass and give them his, his political spin on the situation of how bad Renault are. But yeah, you'll have people like Christian Horner and the drivers complaining, oh, yeah, we've got no power. But it's the engineering teams, again, these people in the background that we don't hear about. And what they did is, well, how can we actually prove when we get a new Renault power unit that it's any good? And what they did is they set up a completely new area in Milton Keynes where their factory is. And they put in what they call a virtual test track, which we heard Williams mention during the year, which is where you can actually put a complete car with all four wheels on a 7-post rig, on dynos, it's blowing air over the coolers. You can check the power unit, you can check the transmission, you can check the brakes, you can check the suspension, does everything apart from aero, really. And they actually use that to validate what Renault said was the case with whatever update they would give them on the power unit, because every time previously they gave them an update, it just didn't deliver what they said. So Red Bull became very diligent in actually testing this. And then at the same time they were suffering this, they saw what was happening with McLaren and Honda, history again repeating itself. So they decided clearly that when they took Honda on, they would deal with them in exactly the same way. They had engineers sent out to Japan, and there was lots of communication. And then they managed in some respects that relationship with Honda. Now, why this hasn't transferred to Aston Martin, because we know a lot of staff have moved across. Maybe it's just too early days for them to have, the facilities and the procedures in place, because, Aston Martin, while it's a big name in motoring, in Formula One, it's still very much the old Force India team. And, while they have grown certainly in the years of Aston Martin investment, they've never really operated as a top level team. And, that takes a long time to get, the entire factory working, from a midfield level up at a leading team, in the top four. So they've got learning to do. You just would have expected them to have done a better job, at this stage, given all of the history that was, obvious for everyone to see.
Well, Craig, thank you very much for answering all the questions, and I hope everyone who's been listening and watching along have enjoyed this. But before I let you go, I have to take the expectations. We've done our expectations, and we've done some of the predictions before the testing. But now that we have also seen a glimpse of what everyone's capable of, give me some of your predictions for Melbourne.
Well, Melbourne's going to be interesting. Melbourne's probably the worst track to, I was chatting to Peter Windsor. This is probably the worst track to bring these cars to as race number one. If we have a dry, relatively warm weekend, I think you've got one outcome. if we get dots of rain either during running or overnight, anything could happen. If we have a wet race, honestly, all bets are off. Anything, could happen in what's probably end up being almost a farcical race, because these cars are so hard to drive. But let's say that everything runs smoothly. I think everyone is hyping Mercedes up as a victory, and everyone's saying that George Russell is, the most obvious person to win that race. And I kind of agree with that. I think that is about right. We definitely will have a top 4 team, top 4 teams. I think Hadjar was probably going to be one of the drivers out of those 8 that may struggle the most. But he's still learning. He's still young. But I noticed from testing that almost no one was talking about McLaren. You very rarely saw the McLaren on track. No one was talking about weird updates and radical innovations and things. They just kind of got on with their program. And again, they set great lap times. There's no question of it. I feel, having said actually earlier this week that it was a George Russell win, I'm actually now going to switch that round and say it's going to be a McLaren win. I just think they're ready for this season. Now maybe I've been, what I see is exactly how it is, and they haven't had a great testing, but I just think they've just kept it quiet, and they have the advantage that they've got the fantastic Mercedes power unit that they can manage without having to get deeply involved in its own development. We know they're great with tyre management, and as I said earlier, they're the kind of 2 key traits that you've got to manage this year. The car looks fantastic. It's up as probably one of the best aerodynamic looking cars out there from what I can see as an outside observer. So yeah, I would probably go as far to say Lando Norris victory now. And that's not to say that is how the season will pan out, but I just think in terms of being ready for what could potentially be such a difficult Grand Prix weekend, that McLaren are ready for it more than anybody else. But it could be any of the top 4 teams. In all honesty, it's just that close.
Idris over here is asking, Lewis World Driver Championship?
I've had this question a lot over the pre-season. Let me put it this way. Lewis could win the championship this year. If he doesn't, I doubt that it would be anything that Lewis has done to have lost it. The Ferrari looks like it's going to be a good car. His body, again, talking about Adrian Newey's face, when you look at Lewis's body language, it's all up there. He's made all various comments to the press.
Right.
He just looks like he's up again, having seen him quite low last year. I think he posted something on Instagram today to kind of reaffirm that fact. The problem you've got is Lewis is a great driver. Charles is a fantastic driver.
Yes.
The Ferrari is looking like a good car and power unit. Then you start to come into the other factors that make a championship. So then you've got race strategy, not Ferrari's strong point. You've got the race engineering and getting the driver feeling good in the car, which again, Lewis, looks like he's going to have a temporary race engineer for a while, which really kind of messes with your brain. Ferrari have made some technical changes to the car, particularly around the front suspension, which could affect how Lewis feels with the steering. Now, so far, he's only really run it at a particularly wet and uncomfortable Barcelona and in Bahrain. We've got lots of different circuits coming along. Will Lewis have the feel for that car that he likes? We've seen him have lots of lockups, as have other drivers. I just feel, looking at each of the teams, they've each got different challenges if they're going to put together a world championship season. And I think Ferrari are just maybe a step behind where Red Bull are, where McLaren are. And I think Mercedes, with the years that they've had, maybe have slipped back like Ferrari have, maybe haven't got all of that level of preparation and experience still in the team to have a really smooth championship year. And let's face it, winning a championship is not just about being the greatest driver or having the greatest car. As you saw with McLaren last year, I rather jokingly say that, you know, Norris literally dragged the championship over the line on the last lap of that race, but it really was kind of at that level because McLaren and both drivers were learning how to put a championship year together. I think they've learned from that. Let's see if they improve into this year. So yeah, it's who wins the championship. There's so many factors this year. It will be interesting to see who can actually just put all of those races over all of these months and, you know, get the most points at the end of it. It's going to be fascinating.
And which team or driver are going to be the surprise of the first race?
Oh, surprise! That's an interesting one, because the midfield is very hard to kind of pick out. I noticed VCarb, if that's the correct name for them now, Visa Cash App, whatever they are, are looking good. They're looking good. Alpine, a lot of people keep telling me that Alpine are looking fantastic. I personally haven't seen that. I think Alpine have got a lot of work to do if they're going to impress me this year. Again, Haas looked very solid as well. So it's hard to think who will really kind of surprise, but I think you're looking at one of those teams. So let's be optimistic and say that it is, you know, the VCarb team that, you know, finally deliver on some of the promise that they've had in previous years. You know, they've got two quite racy drivers, and if they can qualify well, keep out of trouble, I think they could surprise us. Of course, if you don't qualify well or you don't get off the line very well, you're going to be in a world of pain and probably damage to your car this year, because everyone's going to be elbows out fighting in that midfield.
Well, on that note, I think we shall keep it here, and we can't wait for Melbourne to come around quicker. And a couple of races for everyone here, either in central time zones to adapt of waking up early morning, watch at least the first 3 races in the morning. And I would love to say thank you very much, Craig, for doing this. And we hopefully do more to come, maybe post races. Let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
But I know you have a busy schedule, and thank you very much for always coming along with us and having a nice chat with us. And for everyone who's been watching, I'd love to tell you thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of your weekend, and have a good night.